They said the guest bedroom was reserved for real family, and that the car would be perfectly comfortable for someone like me. The December wind cut through the cracked window sill as I arranged blankets across the back seat, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. I didn't argue. I just quietly started documenting everything. Every cruel word, every illegal eviction, every violation of tenant rights. Because while they slept warm in their beds, I was planning something that would make their Christmas morning very different from what they expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Lily Mitchell, and at 68 years old, I thought I had seen every shade of family cruelty. I was wrong. That December taught me that blood relations could cut deeper than any stranger's blade, and that sometimes the people who share your name are the ones most willing to erase you from existence. I had been living in my nephew Tyler's house in Riverside, California for 8 months when the Christmas incident occurred. Not by choice, mind you, but by necessity. My small apartment building had been condemned after a gas leak explosion damaged the foundation beyond repair. The insurance settlement was tied up in litigation, and my Social Security check barely covered basic necessities, let alone first month's rent and deposits on a new place. Tyler Mitchell, my late brother's son, had offered his spare room with what seemed like genuine concern. He was 45, recently divorced, working as a regional sales manager for an electronics company. His house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet subdivision, nothing fancy but clean and well-maintained. When he picked me up from the temporary motel I'd been staying in, he carried my suitcases with care and assured me I could stay as long as needed. "Family takes care of family, Aunt Lily," he had said, using my name with genuine warmth that made me think perhaps this arrangement might actually work. For the first few months it did work. Tyler was often traveling for business, so I had the house mostly to myself. I maintained it meticulously, cleaned, cooked, managed the mail, even arranged for small repairs when needed. I used my modest savings to contribute to groceries and utilities without being asked. I was quiet, respectful, and grateful. The problems began when Tyler started dating Samantha Brooks in late October. Samantha was 38, blonde, loud, and had very specific opinions about how other people should live their lives. She worked in real estate and spoke with the kind of aggressive confidence that mistook volume for authority. Within 2 weeks of meeting her, Tyler's demeanor toward me began to shift. Nimmisif. The changes started small. Tyler stopped asking how my day was when he came home. He began eating dinner in his room instead of at the kitchen table, where we used to share quiet conversations about his work travels or my memories of his father. Samantha would arrive most evenings around 7, letting herself in without knocking, her high heels clicking across the hardwood floors like territorial markers. She never spoke to me directly during those first visits. Instead, she would talk about me to Tyler as if I weren't sitting 3 feet away. "The living room feels so cramped with all that old furniture," she would say, gesturing toward my reading chair and small bookshelf. "And that bathroom soap smell is really overwhelming. It's like walking into a nursing home." I kept my responses minimal and polite. I moved my chair to the corner, switched to unscented soap, and tried to make myself as unobtrusive as possible. I had lived through enough family dynamics to know that sometimes the best strategy was to become invisible until the storm passed. But Samantha wasn't interested in coexistence. She was interested in colonization. By November, she was staying over most nights. Her toiletries appeared in the main bathroom, displacing my modest collection to a small basket under the sink. Her clothes began hanging in Tyler's closet, and her expensive face creams filled the medicine cabinet. She rearranged the living room furniture to create what she called better flow, which somehow always resulted in my belongings being relocated to less convenient spaces. Tyler said nothing about these changes. When I gently mentioned that perhaps we could discuss bathroom schedules or storage arrangements, he waved me off with distracted assurances that everything would work itself out. He seemed increasingly uncomfortable with any conversation that might require him to set boundaries with Samantha, and I began to realize that my nephew, once a decisive, independent man, had become someone who chose appeasement over fairness. The first direct confrontation came on a rainy Tuesday evening in mid-November. I was preparing dinner, a simple pot roast with vegetables, when Samantha arrived earlier than usual. She walked into the kitchen, surveyed the scene, and announced that she had made reservations for her and Tyler at a new steakhouse downtown. You can just put that in the fridge, she said, gesturing dismissively at the roast. We won't be eating here tonight. I nodded politely and began covering the dish. That's when she continued. Actually, Lily, we need to talk about the meal situation in general. Tyler's been telling me you cook these really heavy, old-fashioned meals, and it's just not working for our lifestyle. We're trying to eat cleaner, more modern. Maybe you could stick to simpler things for yourself and let us handle our own food. I set down the aluminum foil and looked at her directly for the first time. I always cook enough for everyone. If you prefer different food, you're welcome to prepare it. That's not really the point, she said, her voice taking on the patronizing tone I would come to despise. The point is that this is going to be our space soon, and we need to start thinking about how to make it work for everyone. Our space. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't seen starting. I wasn't aware that Tyler was planning any changes to our arrangement, I said carefully. Samantha laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. Oh, Dorothy, you can't seriously think this temporary situation was going to last forever. Tyler's just too polite to have the hard conversations. But we're planning a future together. That means making some adult decisions about living situations. That night, I heard them talking in Tyler's room through the thin walls. I couldn't make out specific words, but I could hear the rhythms of negotiation, the rise and fall of voices working through logistics. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, and felt the first real chill of what was coming. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified in ways both subtle and overt. Samantha would arrive with friends for impromptu dinner parties, never mentioning them to me in advance, leaving me to either awkwardly join conversations where I clearly wasn't welcome, or retreat to my room like a scolded child. She began moving my belongings without asking. My reading glasses disappeared from the living room end table, my coffee mug was relocated to the back of the cabinet. My mail was organized into neat stacks that somehow always ended up buried under her catalogs and magazines. Tyler became increasingly distant, speaking to me primarily in logistical terms about grocery lists or utility bills. The nephew who had once called me for advice about his divorce, who had brought me his father's watch after the funeral and asked me to keep it safe, began treating me like a problematic roommate whose lease he couldn't wait to terminate. The final escalation came the first week of December, when Samantha announced that her family would be joining them for Christmas dinner. Not asked if this was acceptable. Not suggested we plan together. Announced, as if the decision had been made in a boardroom where I held no voting shares. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My parents are driving down from Sacramento, she told Tyler over breakfast, while I stood at the kitchen sink washing my single coffee cup. My parents are driving down from Sacramento, she continued, ticking off names on her manicured fingers. My sister Jessica and her husband are flying in from Phoenix with their twin boys, and my cousin Marcus is coming from San Diego with his new girlfriend. It's going to be such a full house. Tyler nodded absently, scrolling through his phone while chewing toast. He didn't look up when Samantha added, almost as an afterthought, "We're going to need every bedroom, obviously. The twins can take the guest room, my parents get the master bedroom, since Tyler can sleep on the couch for a few nights, and Jessica and her husband can use Tyler's room." I continued washing the same cup, letting the water run longer than necessary. "What about my room?" I asked quietly. Samantha's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Well, that's the thing, Lily. We've been talking, and we think it might be better if you stayed somewhere else during the holidays. Just temporarily, of course. Maybe one of your friends has a spare room? Or there are some lovely senior communities nearby that do short-term stays." The cup slipped from my hands and clattered into the sink. Tyler finally looked up from his phone, but his expression was carefully neutral. The face of someone who had already agreed to this conversation happening, but didn't want to be the one having it. "I don't have anywhere else to go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is my home for now. We agreed on that." Samantha's smile tightened. "Well, yes, but circumstances change, don't they? And Christmas is really important to Tyler's relationship with my family. First impressions matter so much." She leaned against the counter with practiced casualness. "Besides, wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere? Quieter. All those kids running around. The noise, the chaos. It's really not suitable for someone your age. Someone my age. The phrase hit like a physical blow. I had raised 3 children, managed a household during my husband's military deployments, worked 30 years as a bookkeeper for a construction company. I had organized church fundraisers, coached Little League, and survived cancer twice. But to Samantha, I was simply someone my age, a fragile, inconvenient obstacle to her perfect holiday tableau. "Tyler," I said, turning to face my nephew directly, "do you want me to leave?" He shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Samantha and me like a child caught between arguing parents. "It's not about wanting, Aunt Lily. It's just practical. Samantha's family has been planning this for months, and we want everything to go smoothly." "I've been planning to spend Christmas here too," I said. "For 8 months, in fact." Samantha stepped forward, her real estate training kicking in. "Look, Lily, let's be realistic here. This living arrangement was always supposed to be temporary while you got back on your feet. Maybe this is actually a good opportunity for you to explore other options. More permanent options. I know several senior communities that are really quite nice." Senior communities. Permanent options. The subtext was clear. This wasn't about Christmas logistics. This was about removing me entirely from their future plans. That afternoon, while Tyler was at work and Samantha was showing houses, I sat in my room and took inventory of my situation. 8 months ago, I had been an independent woman, with my own space, my own routines, my own dignity. Now I was a 68-year-old woman with $2,400 in savings, no apartment, and family members who spoke about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be considered. I opened my laptop, an old Dell that still worked despite its age, and began researching my legal rights. What I discovered was both enlightening and infuriating. In California, I had established myself as a month-to-month tenant through my regular contributions to household expenses and Tyler's written agreement to let me stay as long as needed. Even without a formal lease, I had certain protections under tenant law. More importantly, I learned about something called self-help eviction, which was exactly what Tyler and Samantha were attempting. According to the state's tenant protection laws, a landlord couldn't simply demand that a tenant leave without proper notice and legal procedures. They couldn't lock me out, shut off utilities, or make my living situation so uncomfortable that I was forced to leave, all of which they were systematically doing. I spent that evening documenting everything. I wrote down dates, times, and exact quotes from our conversations. I took photos of my belongings that had been moved or displaced. I made copies of the bank transfers showing my contributions to household expenses. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with this information, but my years of bookkeeping had taught me that documentation was power. The harassment intensified over the following days. Samantha began staying over every night, treating the house as if she already lived there permanently. She rearranged the kitchen to suit her preferences, storing my few dishes in hard-to-reach cabinets. She played music loudly in the evenings and took long showers that left no hot water for anyone else. She invited friends over without warning, filling the living room with strangers who looked at me like an unwelcome party crasher in my own temporary home. Tyler became increasingly passive, nodding along with Samantha's suggestions and avoiding direct conversations with me about anything substantial. When I tried to discuss the Christmas situation, he mumbled something about working it out and disappeared into his room. When I mentioned that I was contributing to groceries for food I wasn't being allowed to eat, he said he'd look into it and changed the subject. The breaking point came on December 15th, exactly 1 week before Samantha's family was due to arrive. I came home from a grocery run to find my belongings packed into cardboard boxes and stacked in the garage. Not just some belongings, everything. My clothes, my books, my medications, my late husband's photo from the nightstand. Even my coffee mug had been wrapped in newspaper and boxed away. Samantha was directing this operation with the efficiency of someone who moved houses for a living. "We're just making space," she said when she saw me standing in the doorway, mouth agape. "Don't worry, everything's clearly labeled and organized. We thought it would be easier than having you pack while the family's here. You went through my personal belongings, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. You had no right. We were being helpful, Samantha replied coolly. Tyler said you'd probably appreciate not having to deal with it yourself. Tyler emerged from the house carrying a box marked Lily Kitchen Items in Samantha's precise handwriting. He had the grace to look ashamed, but not enough to stop what he was doing. Where exactly am I supposed to sleep tonight? I asked. Samantha and Tyler exchanged a look that somehow managed to be both conspiratorial and guilty. Well, Samantha said slowly, we thought maybe you could stay in the living room for a few days, just until you figure out other arrangements. The couch, you mean? It's quite comfortable, Tyler said weakly. I've slept there myself plenty of times. I walked through the house, surveying the damage. My room, which had been sparse but mine, was now stripped bare, except for a stack of fresh linens clearly intended for Samantha's sister. The bathroom no longer contained any of my toiletries. Even my reading chair had been moved to the garage, replaced by a decorative plant I had never seen before. That night, I lay on Tyler's couch under a thin throw blanket, listening to Samantha's voice drift from the bedroom as she made phone calls to her family, finalizing arrangements for their Christmas invasion. She spoke with the casual authority of someone orchestrating events in her own home, discussing meal plans and sleeping arrangements as if I had never existed. The couch was too short for my height and too soft for my back. Every time Tyler or Samantha moved around upstairs, the old house creaked and groaned, making sleep impossible. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the clarity that settled over me in those dark hours. Buffettery. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to plead for basic human decency from people who had already demonstrated they were incapable of providing it. I wasn't going to allow myself to be erased for the convenience of others. But I also wasn't going to make it easy for them. The next morning, while Tyler was at work and Samantha was at her office, I began making phone calls. First, to the Riverside County Tenant Rights Hotline, where a sympathetic advocate named Maria confirmed my legal protections and provided me with specific information about filing complaints. Then to Legal Aid, where I scheduled a consultation for the following day. Finally, to the California Department of Consumer Affairs, where I learned about documentation requirements for housing discrimination cases. I also called my old neighbor from my condemned apartment building, Mrs. Chen, who had always been kind to me. She had mentioned that her daughter was a paralegal who specialized in tenant rights. Within an hour, I had the contact information for Rebecca Chen, Esquire, who agreed to meet with me that afternoon. Rebecca Chen turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who listened to my story with the focused attention of someone who had heard similar tales too many times. She reviewed my documentation, asked detailed questions about the timeline of events, and took notes in a leather portfolio that suggested she was very good at her job. Mrs. Mitchell, she said when I finished my account, you have several viable legal options here. Self-help eviction is illegal in California, and what you're describing constitutes harassment designed to force you from your legal residence. We can file for immediate emergency relief to restore your housing situation, and we can pursue damages for the violation of your tenant rights. How long would that take? I asked. Emergency relief can be expedited, especially given the upcoming holiday and your age. We could potentially have a hearing within 48 hours. She leaned forward. But I want you to understand something, Mrs. Mitchell. Legal action will likely end your relationship with your nephew permanently. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Tyler as a little boy, visiting during summers, following me around the kitchen while I baked cookies. I thought about the phone call after his father's funeral, when he had cried and told me I was the only family he had left. I thought about the man who had carried my suitcases with care just 8 months ago. Then I thought about the stranger who had watched his girlfriend pack my belongings without protest, who had allowed me to be treated like unwanted furniture in my own home. Yes, I told Rebecca Chen, I'm prepared for that. But as I walked back to Tyler's house that evening, my mind was already moving beyond legal remedies. I wanted justice, yes, but I also wanted something more personal. Something that would make them understand exactly what they had done and exactly what it cost. I wanted them to spend their perfect Christmas exactly the way they had planned for me to spend mine. Cold, uncomfortable, and completely displaced from where they thought they belonged. The plan that began forming in my mind that night was both simpler and more devastating than anything a courtroom could provide. And it would start with something Tyler and Samantha had forgotten in their rush to erase me. I still had keys to the house, and more importantly, I still had access to Tyler's filing cabinet where he kept all his important documents, including some documents he probably wished he had never signed. What I found in Tyler's filing cabinet that night changed everything. Not just about my situation, but about who my nephew really was and what he had been hiding from everyone, including himself. It was 2 a.m. when I finally worked up the courage to venture into Tyler's home office. The house was silent except for the low hum of the heater and the occasional creak of settling wood. Samantha had left around midnight after another evening of treating me like invisible furniture, and Tyler was dead asleep. I could hear his snoring through the thin walls. The office had once been the third bedroom, converted with cheap paneling and fluorescent lighting that made everything look sickly and institutional. Tyler's desk was cluttered with electronics catalogs and energy drink cans, but the filing cabinet in the corner was what interested me. It was an old metal 4-drawer unit that had belonged to his father, my brother, and I remembered it from their previous house. The top drawer was unlocked, filled with typical household documents, utility bills, insurance policies, warranty information. The second drawer contained Tyler's work papers and tax returns, but the third drawer required a small key that I found, after 20 minutes of careful searching, taped under the bottom lip of the desk drawer. Inside that locked drawer was a revelation that made my blood run cold. Ma'am, credit card statements. Dozens of them, from at least 8 different companies. The balances were staggering, minus $23,000 on one card, $31,000 on another, $18,000 on a third. Some statements showed minimum payments that were 3 months overdue. Late fees were compounding monthly. Interest rates had been raised to penalty levels of 29.99%, but it wasn't just credit card debt. There were notices from the IRS regarding unpaid taxes from 2 years ago, now grown to over $45,000 with penalties and interest. There were past due notices from the mortgage company threatening foreclosure proceedings. Medical bills from Tyler's divorce-related therapy sessions that had apparently never been paid. My nephew, who drove a new Lexus and took Samantha to expensive restaurants twice a week, was drowning in debt to the tune of nearly $200,000. Then I found the documents that explained everything. Hidden beneath the financial statements was a folder marked Estate Planning in Tyler's careful handwriting. Inside were papers I recognized immediately, documents related to my brother's will, and the inheritance Tyler had received when his father died 3 years ago. My brother had left Tyler this house, along with a substantial life insurance policy and investment portfolio. But he had also included a provision that Tyler had apparently never mentioned to me. If Tyler ever defaulted on the mortgage or was forced to sell the house, 40% of the proceeds would go to me as my brother's surviving sister. There was more. My brother had set up a trust that would provide me with a monthly stipend of $800 for the rest of my life, drawn from his investment accounts. Tyler was the trustee, responsible for making those payments to me every month. I had never received a single payment. According to the bank statements I found, Tyler had been liquidating the trust investments for over 2 years, using the money to make minimum payments on his credit cards and cover his mortgage shortfalls. The trust that was supposed to support me for life had been reduced from $180,000 to less than $15,000. My hands were shaking as I photographed every document with my phone. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. Tyler hadn't invited me to stay with him out of family loyalty or concern for my well-being. He had invited me to move in because he was desperate to have someone help with household expenses, while he systematically stole the inheritance my brother had intended for me. But the worst was yet to come. At the bottom of the file was a document dated just 6 weeks ago, a loan application for a home equity line of credit. Tyler was attempting to borrow against the house's value to consolidate his debts. In the application, he had listed me as a, quote, temporary house guest, with no legal claim to the property, despite my brother's will explicitly giving me a 40% interest if the house was ever sold or refinanced. The loan had been approved for $85,000. The paperwork was scheduled to be finalized on December 30th, 5 days after Christmas. I sat in that cold office for another hour, photographing documents and cross-referencing dates. The pattern was clear. Tyler had been planning to force me out of the house so he could complete this loan without having to disclose my legal interest in the property. Samantha's family Christmas gathering wasn't just about convenience. It was a cover story for my eviction. Once the loan was finalized, Tyler would have enough money to make his debt payments for another year or two. But my inheritance, the financial security my brother had specifically set aside for my old age, would be gone forever. I thought about confronting Tyler immediately, demanding explanations and restitution. But as I carefully returned the documents to their original positions and locked the filing cabinet, a different plan began to form. Tyler and Samantha thought they were dealing with a helpless elderly woman who could be manipulated and discarded. They had no idea that I had spent 30 years managing financial records for a construction company, that I understood contracts and liens and legal obligations better than most people half my age. They certainly had no idea that their Christmas eviction scheme was about to become the least of their problems. The next morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop when Tyler stumbled out of his bedroom, looking hungover and anxious. Samantha emerged a few minutes later, already dressed and checking her phone with the efficient energy of someone managing multiple real estate deals. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. "Sleep well?" Tyler mumbled something non-committal and began making toast. Samantha ignored me entirely, except to move my coffee mug from the counter to the sink with pointed irritation. "Tyler," I said, keeping my voice casual, "I was wondering if you could help me understand something about Dad's estate. I was looking through some old papers last night, and I found a reference to a trust he set up. Do you know anything about that?" Tyler froze. A piece of bread halfway to the toaster. "What kind of reference?" "Oh, just some insurance paperwork that mentioned monthly payments. I thought maybe there was a mistake in the records, since I've never received anything." I smiled sweetly. "I'm sure it's just an oversight." The blood drained from Tyler's face. Samantha looked up from her phone, sensing the shift in energy without understanding its source. I'd have to look into that," Tyler said weakly. "The estate stuff was pretty complicated." "Of course," I agreed. "Maybe we could sit down together and review everything? I have some free time today." "Today's not good," Tyler said quickly. "I have meetings all day. And then we need to prep for Samantha's family arriving." "That's right," Samantha interjected, finally tuning into the conversation. "Which reminds me, Lily, have you made arrangements for somewhere to stay during Christmas?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. I spoke with a lawyer yesterday about my housing rights, and she had some very interesting things to say about tenant protections in California." The silence that followed was profound. Tyler stared at me like I had just announced I was planning to burn the house down. Samantha's expression shifted from casual dismissal to sharp attention. "A lawyer?" Tyler repeated. "Oh yes, Rebecca Chen from Morrison, Chen and Associates. She specializes in elder law and tenant rights." "Fascinating woman." I smiled again. She was very interested in my situation. Apparently, there are significant penalties for what she called self-help eviction and, quote, financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. I stood up, rinsed my coffee mug, and turned to face them both. "She's going to call me this afternoon with some options for how to proceed. I'm sure we can work everything out amicably, though. We're family after all." Tyler's face had gone from pale to greenish. Samantha was staring at him with the expression of someone who was beginning to realize she had been dating a man with significantly more problems than she had signed up for. "Anyway," I continued cheerfully, "I have some errands to run today. Banking, you know. Making sure all my financial records are in order." I paused at the kitchen doorway. "Oh, and Tyler, you might want to check your father's will again, just to refresh your memory about the trust provisions. I think there may have been some misunderstandings." I left them sitting in stunned silence and walked to my car with the satisfaction of someone who had just fired the opening shot in a war she intended to win. My first stop was the bank where my brother's trust account was held. Armed with copies of the will and documentation of my legal interest, I met with a branch manager who became increasingly concerned as I explained the situation. Within an hour, a freeze had been placed on all trust account transactions pending a formal investigation. My second stop was the county recorder's office, where I filed a formal notice of my 40% interest in Tyler's house. This document would now appear in any title search, making it impossible for Tyler to complete his home equity loan without addressing my claim. My third stop was back to Rebecca Chen's office, where I provided her with photographs of all the financial documents I had discovered. Her paralegal began preparing emergency motions to freeze Tyler's assets and appoint an independent trustee for my brother's estate. But my final stop was the most important: the Riverside Police Department's white-collar crime unit. Detective Sarah Morrison was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and the weary expression of someone who had seen every possible variation of family financial abuse. She listened to my story with professional calm, occasionally asking questions about dates, amounts, and documentation. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said when I finished, "what you're describing constitutes several serious felonies: embezzlement of trust funds, elder financial abuse, fraud in connection with a loan application. We're talking about potential prison time." "I understand," I said. "What happens next?" "We'll need to conduct a formal investigation, which will take some time. But based on what you've shown me, I can probably get a warrant to search the premises and seize financial records within 24 hours. 24 hours. That would be December 18th, exactly 4 days before Samantha's family was due to arrive for their perfect Christmas celebration. "Detective Morrison," I said carefully, "would it be possible to time the search for maximum impact?" She looked at me with something that might have been admiration. "Mrs. Mitchell, we execute warrants based on investigative necessity, not personal convenience." "Of course. However," she continued with the faintest smile, "if our investigation requires us to secure evidence during a particular time frame, well, that's just good police work." I walked back to my car feeling lighter than I had in months. Tyler and Samantha thought they had outmaneuvered a helpless old woman. What they were about to discover was that they had declared war on someone who understood exactly how to fight back. And Christmas morning was going to be very different from what they had planned. Woe to keep backs, the next 3 days passed with an electric tension that only I seemed to feel. Tyler and Samantha went about their Christmas preparations with increasing franticness, as if activity could somehow shield them from the reckoning that was coming. They had no idea that every phone call they made, every plan they finalized, every cruel dismissal they threw my way was just digging their grave deeper. Tyler had become a nervous wreck. I caught him several times standing in his office doorway, staring at the filing cabinet as if he could somehow sense that his secrets had been exposed. He jumped every time his phone rang and had developed a facial tic that made his left eye twitch when he looked at me. The confident, dismissive man who had allowed his girlfriend to pack my belongings was rapidly dissolving into someone who flinched at shadows. Samantha, meanwhile, had doubled down on her campaign to make my existence unbearable. She seemed to sense that something had shifted in the power dynamic, but her response was to become even more aggressively territorial. She moved the rest of my kitchen items to the garage, claiming she needed cabinet space for the special dishes her mother was bringing. She began playing music loudly at all hours, and invited friends over for pre-Christmas cocktails that lasted until well past midnight, filling the house with strangers who treated me like an embarrassing relative hidden in the corner. But what she didn't know was that every act of harassment was being carefully documented, not just by me, but by the court-appointed advocate who had been assigned to my case after Rebecca Chen filed our emergency motions. On December 19th, Rebecca called with an update that made my heart race with vindictive satisfaction. "Lily, the judge granted our emergency motion," she said, barely containing her excitement. "Effective immediately, Tyler is prohibited from accessing any of the trust accounts, refinancing the house, or taking any action that would affect your inheritance rights. We also got a temporary restraining order requiring him to restore your living conditions to their original state." "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means he has 24 hours to move your belongings back into your room and cease any harassment designed to force you from the residence. If he violates this order, he can be arrested for contempt of court." I looked around the garage where I was making this phone call, surrounded by boxes labeled in Samantha's precise handwriting. Tomorrow, all of this would have to be moved back. Tomorrow, Tyler would have to face the reality that his Christmas eviction plan had not only failed, but had resulted in legal consequences he never imagined. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "The police investigation has moved faster than expected. Detective Morrison obtained a search warrant based on the evidence you provided. They're planning to execute it tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. December 20th. 2 days before Samantha's family was scheduled to arrive. "Rebecca," I said carefully, "is there any way to know what time they might arrive? These things are usually executed early, to catch people before they leave for work. I'd guess somewhere between 6 and 8 a.m. She paused. "Lily, you should know that this is going to be traumatic for everyone involved. Are you prepared for how ugly this might get?" I thought about the past 3 days of sleeping on the couch while listening to Samantha laugh with her friends about the old lady who doesn't know when she's not wanted. I thought about Tyler's betrayal of his father's trust and the inheritance I should have been receiving for 2 years. I thought about being treated like discarded furniture in my own temporary home. "I'm prepared," I said. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since moving in with Tyler. I cooked a proper dinner. Not because anyone had asked me to. Not as a peace offering or an attempt to smooth over tensions, but because I wanted to. I made pot roast with vegetables, mashed potatoes, and apple pie. The familiar rhythms of cooking felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been slowly eroded over the past months. Tyler came home to the smell of dinner cooking and looked genuinely confused. "What's all this?" he asked, hovering uncertainly in the kitchen doorway. "Dinner," I said simply. "I thought we should have a nice meal together before Christmas." He shifted nervously. "That's nice, Aunt Lily, but Samantha and I were going to go out tonight. She's got reservations at that new steakhouse." "Cancel them," I said, not looking up from the potatoes I was mashing. "We need to talk as a family." Something in my tone must have penetrated his anxiety, because Tyler actually pulled out his phone and called Samantha. I listened to him explain that his aunt had made dinner, and they should probably stay in tonight. Samantha's voice carried clearly through the phone, shrill with indignation about changed plans and wasted reservations. "Tell her she's welcome to join us," I called out. "I made plenty." 20 minutes later, Samantha arrived with the expression of someone attending a funeral for someone she hadn't particularly liked. She surveyed the dining room table, set with Tyler's good china and cloth napkins, as if it were a crime scene. "This is lovely, Lily," she said with practiced real estate agent charm. "So domestic." We sat down to eat in a silence that felt thick with unspoken tensions. I served generous portions and made pleasant small talk about the weather, the neighborhood Christmas decorations, plans for the coming year. Tyler picked at his food nervously while Samantha ate with mechanical precision, clearly calculating how quickly she could finish and escape. "Tyler," I said as I served the pie, "I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, about Dad's estate." Tyler's fork froze halfway to his mouth. "What about it?" "Well, I spoke with that lawyer I mentioned, and she helped me understand some things I hadn't realized before." I smiled pleasantly. "Did you know that Dad set up a trust fund for me? $800 a month for the rest of my life. Isn't that thoughtful?" Samantha looked between Tyler and me with growing confusion. Tyler's face had gone pale again, that familiar greenish tinge creeping around his eyes. Yes, I remember something about that," he mumbled. "The interesting thing is, I've never received any of those payments. Not one, in the 3 years since Dad died." I took a delicate bite of pie. "My lawyer thinks there might have been some kind of administrative error. She's looking into it." "Administrative error," Tyler repeated weakly. "She's also reviewing the terms of Dad's will, just to make sure everything was handled properly. Apparently there were some provisions about the house that might affect your recent loan application." Samantha's attention sharpened. "What loan application?" Tyler shot me a look of pure panic. Clearly, Samantha didn't know about the home equity loan he was trying to secure. She didn't know about the massive debts, the financial crisis, the fact that her boyfriend was essentially broke despite his expensive lifestyle. "Oh, just some refinancing Tyler was considering," I said innocently. "Although it might be complicated now, what with the legal review and all." "What legal review?" Samantha demanded, turning to Tyler. "What is she talking about?" Tyler opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. "It's nothing, Sam. Just some paperwork confusion." "Paperwork confusion that requires a lawyer?" Samantha's voice was rising. "Tyler, what the hell is going on?" I stood up and began clearing the dishes. "Well, I'm sure you two have things to discuss. Thank you for joining me for dinner. It's nice to have family time together." As I loaded the dishwasher, I could hear their voices rising in the dining room. Samantha was demanding explanations Tyler couldn't provide without revealing the full extent of his deception. The sounds of their argument followed me as I made my way to the couch that had been my bed for the past week. But tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, Tyler would learn that legal consequences weren't just theoretical threats made by elderly aunts with lawyers. Tomorrow, Samantha would discover exactly what kind of man she had been planning a future with. And tomorrow, I would watch from the front row as their perfect Christmas plans collapsed around them, like a house built on lies and stolen money. I set my alarm for 5:30 a.m. I wanted to be awake, dressed, and ready when the police arrived. After months of being treated like an inconvenience, I was finally going to be the most important person in the room. The irony wasn't lost on me. Tyler and Samantha had worked so hard to erase me from their Christmas story. Instead, they had made me the central character in a very different kind of holiday tale, one where the vulnerable elderly woman they thought they could exploit turned out to be the one holding all the cards. As I lay on the couch listening to their argument escalate in the next room, I thought about my brother and what he would have said about his son's betrayal. My brother had been a man who believed in accountability, in facing the consequences of your choices with dignity. Tyler was about to learn those lessons the hard way, and I was going to make sure he learned them in front of an audience. The police arrived at 6:47 a.m., just as the winter sun was beginning to paint the sky a pale gray. I had been awake for over an hour, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and watching the street through the window. When the unmarked sedan pulled up, followed by a patrol car, my heart began racing with an anticipation I hadn't felt since I was a child on Christmas morning. Detective Morrison stepped out of the sedan, her breath visible in the cold air. She was accompanied by two other plainclothes officers and a uniformed patrolman who looked like he could have been my grandson. They moved with the efficient calm of people who did this regularly, but I could see the tension in their shoulders. Financial crimes might not be as dangerous as armed robberies, but family situations could explode in unpredictable ways. I opened the front door before they had a chance to knock. "Good morning, Detective Morrison," I said quietly. "They're both still asleep upstairs." She nodded and held up the search warrant. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're here to execute a search warrant for financial documents and electronic records. You'll need to stay in one area while we conduct our search." "Of course. Would the kitchen be acceptable?" "That's fine. We'll try to keep this as orderly as possible." The team moved into the house like a well-choreographed dance. Two officers headed upstairs to wake Tyler and Samantha, while Detective Morrison and the fourth officer began setting up in Tyler's office. I heard the heavy footsteps on the stairs, followed by confused voices, and then Tyler's panicked shout. "What the hell is this? You can't just come into my house." "Sir, we have a warrant," came the calm reply. "Please step out of the bedroom with your hands visible." The next few minutes were chaos. Tyler came stumbling down the stairs in boxer shorts and a t-shirt, his hair standing up in wild tufts, demanding to see the warrant, and threatening to call his lawyer. Samantha followed in a silk robe, her face puffy with sleep and growing alarm as she tried to understand what was happening. "Lily!" Tyler spotted me in the kitchen and his voice cracked with desperation. "What did you do? What did you tell them?" Before I could answer, Detective Morrison emerged from the office. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Detective Morrison with the Riverside Police Department. We have a warrant to search these premises for documents related to financial crimes, including embezzlement, elder abuse, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." "Financial crimes?" Samantha's voice was shrill. "Tyler, what is she talking about?" Tyler wasn't listening to the Miranda warning. He was staring at me with an expression of such betrayal and rage that for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "She's lying," he said, his voice getting higher with each word. "Whatever she told you, She's lying. She's old, she gets confused, she doesn't understand how estates work. Detective Morrison finished reading his rights and gestured for Tyler to sit on the couch. Mr. Mitchell, we're not here based on anyone's testimony. We're here because we have documented evidence of financial irregularities in the Edward Mitchell Trust account. The color drained from Tyler's face so completely that I thought he might faint. Samantha was looking between Tyler and the detective, like someone watching a tennis match played in a foreign language. Edward Mitchell Trust? She repeated. Tyler, who is Edward Mitchell? His father, I said quietly. My brother, the man who left Tyler this house and a substantial inheritance, along with specific provisions for my care. Detective Morrison nodded. Mrs. Brooks, you might want to sit down. This could take a while. Over the next 2 hours, I watched Tyler's carefully constructed life disintegrate piece by piece. The officers methodically removed boxes of financial records from his office, each one representing another thread in the web of deception he had woven. His computer was seized, along with several external hard drives I didn't even know existed. But the most devastating moment came when Detective Morrison emerged from the office, carrying Tyler's filing cabinet key, and asked him to open the locked drawer. I don't have to open anything, Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, you do, Detective Morrison replied. It's specified in the warrant. We can break it open if necessary, but that tends to damage the contents. Tyler's hands shook as he unlocked the drawer. When Detective Morrison began removing the credit card statements and tax notices, Samantha gasped audibly. $200,000? She whispered, staring at a statement from Tyler's largest credit card. Tyler, you told me you paid off your debts after the divorce. I did, Tyler said desperately. These are business expenses. Investment opportunities? Investment opportunities? Detective Morrison held up a statement showing cash advances at 3 different casinos. Is that what you call gambling, Mr. Mitchell? The room fell silent except for the sound of papers being sorted and photographed. Samantha sat frozen on the couch, still clutching her silk robe around herself, as the reality of Tyler's financial situation became clear. The expensive restaurants, the luxury car, the designer clothes she had been wearing, all of it financed with stolen money and mounting debt. Tyler, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The loan you mentioned last night, how much were you trying to borrow? Tyler wouldn't meet her eyes. It's not what you think, Sam. $85,000, Detective Morrison answered for him, consulting her notes. Secured against the house that, according to his father's will, he only owns 60% of. Samantha's head snapped toward me. 60%? I nodded. My brother left me a 40% interest in case the house was ever sold or refinanced. He wanted to make sure I was protected. I paused. Tyler was planning to complete that loan without disclosing my legal claim. That's called fraud. You knew? Samantha turned to Tyler with growing fury. You knew she owned part of this house and you were going to take out a loan anyway? It's complicated, Tyler started, but Samantha cut him off. Complicated? You were stealing from your aunt and lying to the bank and you think it's complicated? She stood up, her silk robe billowing dramatically. I can't be here for this. She headed for the stairs, but Detective Morrison stopped her. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay available for questioning. We may have some questions about your knowledge of Mr. Mitchell's financial situation. My knowledge? Samantha's voice cracked. I don't know anything about any of this. He told me he was financially stable. He told me his divorce settlement had paid off his debts. What about the trust payments? Detective Morrison asked. Did you know that Mr. Mitchell was supposed to be making monthly payments to his aunt from his father's estate? Samantha stared at Tyler with dawning horror. Monthly payments? Tyler, what monthly payments? Tyler finally looked up from his hands. $800 a month, he whispered. For the past 3 years. $28,800, I said quietly. Plus interest and penalties for late payment. Plus the trust principal he liquidated to cover his gambling debts. Samantha sank back onto the couch as if her legs had given out. "Oh my God! Tyler, what have you done?" What he had done was about to get much worse. Detective Morrison approached Tyler with a formal expression that made my pulse quicken. "Tyler Mitchell, you are under arrest for embezzlement, elder financial abuse, and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." "Wait!" Tyler jumped up, panic making his voice crack. "Wait, this is all a misunderstanding. Aunt Lily, tell them this is a family matter. We can work this out between us." I looked at my nephew, this man who had carried my suitcases with such care 8 months ago, who had promised that family takes care of family, who had systematically stolen my future while allowing his girlfriend to treat me like garbage in my own temporary home. "Tyler," I said calmly, "this stopped being a family matter when you decided to steal my inheritance and throw me out on the street." The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. Tyler was read his rights again, more formally this time, while Samantha watched in stunned silence. As the officers led him toward the door, he turned back to me one last time. "This isn't over," he said, and for a moment his voice carried an edge of the old Tyler, the one who had controlled this house and my place in it. "You'll regret this." I smiled sadly. "Tyler, I already regretted trusting you. This is me fixing that mistake." After Tyler was placed in the patrol car and driven away, Detective Morrison spent another hour interviewing Samantha, who alternated between tears and furious outbursts about being deceived. It became clear that she genuinely hadn't known about Tyler's financial crimes, though her complete lack of concern for how I had been treated didn't earn her any sympathy from anyone in the room. When the police finally left, taking boxes of evidence and leaving seizure notices for Tyler's computer and financial records, Samantha and I were alone in the house for the first time since this all began. She sat on the couch in her silk robe, staring at the space where Tyler's filing cabinet had been, looking like someone who had just watched their life explode without warning. "What happens now?" she asked finally. I was standing in the kitchen doorway, feeling more centered than I had in months. "Now you pack your things and leave. This is my home until Tyler's legal situation is resolved, which could take months. But my family is coming tomorrow. We have Christmas plans." I looked at this woman who had spent weeks making my life miserable, who had packed my belongings without permission, who had spoken about me as if I were a piece of unwanted furniture. "Samantha," I said quietly, "your Christmas plans are the least of your problems. I suggest you find a lawyer and figure out whether you're going to be charged as an accessory to Tyler's crimes." She stared at me with something approaching respect for the first time since we'd met. "You planned all of this." "No," I corrected her. "Tyler planned all of this when he decided to steal from me and throw me away. I just made sure he faced the consequences." As Samantha gathered her things and called her family to cancel their Christmas visit, I walked through the house that was temporarily mine again. My belongings were still in the garage, but that would be rectified today according to the court order. The dining room still held the dishes from last night's dinner, the last meal Tyler would eat as a free man for quite some time. I had wanted them to spend Christmas exactly the way they had planned for me to spend it. Cold, uncomfortable, and completely displaced from where they thought they belonged. It turned out I had gotten something even better. Tyler would be spending Christmas in jail, and Samantha would be spending it alone, dealing with the wreckage of a relationship built on lies and stolen money. Sometimes, justice really was the perfect gift. The house felt different after everyone left. Not empty, liberated. For the first time in months, I could walk through the rooms without feeling like an intruder in someone else's space. The silence wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of being unwelcome. It was the peaceful stillness of finally being home. I spent the afternoon moving my belongings back into my room, carefully unpacking each box that Tyler and Samantha had so efficiently sealed away. My books found their way back to the nightstand. My clothes returned to the closet. My few precious photographs resumed their places on the dresser. Each item I restored felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been slowly erased over the past few weeks. But it wasn't just about the physical objects. As I folded my sweaters and arranged my reading materials, I realized I was also unpacking months of accumulated dignity that had been compressed into those cardboard containers. The woman who had apologized for taking up space was gone. In her place was someone who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to defend it. The phone started ringing around 3 o'clock. Word of Tyler's arrest had apparently spread through his workplace, and confused colleagues were calling to ask if I knew what was happening. I kept my responses brief and professional. Tyler is dealing with some legal issues. I can't provide details, but he won't be available for work for the foreseeable future. Samantha's family began calling next. Her mother, speaking with the crisp authority of someone accustomed to managing crises, wanted to know if the Christmas gathering could still happen as planned. When I explained that Samantha no longer lived at this address and wouldn't be hosting anything, there was a long pause. "Are you the elderly relative Samantha mentioned?" her mother asked finally. "I suppose I am. She said you were moving to a senior community for the holidays." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Plans change, Mrs. Brooks. I'm afraid Samantha's Christmas arrangements have been modified." The most difficult call came from Tyler's ex-wife, Jennifer. She had heard about the arrest from their mutual friends and was calling in a panic about their daughter's college tuition. Tyler had been making sporadic support payments, but apparently Jennifer had been counting on a larger sum for the spring semester. "Lily," she said, her voice tight with controlled hysteria, "please tell me this is some kind of mistake. Please tell me Tyler isn't actually broke. I had always liked Jennifer." She was a good mother who had tried to shield their daughter from Tyler's increasingly erratic behavior during their marriage. She deserved honesty. "Jennifer, I think you need to assume that any financial support from Tyler is going to be interrupted for quite some time. He's facing serious criminal charges, and even if he makes bail, his assets are likely to be frozen during the investigation." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When Jennifer spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "How long have you known?" "I discovered the extent of it 3 days ago, but I've suspected Tyler was having financial problems for weeks." "Why didn't you call me?" It was a fair question, and one I had been dreading. "Because I wasn't sure, and because I was dealing with my own situation with Tyler. But Jennifer, you should know. He's been stealing from me too. From my inheritance. This isn't just about credit card debt or poor financial decisions. This is systematic fraud." Another long pause. "Oh, Lily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea that things had gotten so bad." "Neither did I. Until it was almost too late." After Jennifer hung up to begin making emergency financial arrangements for her daughter's education, I sat in the quiet kitchen and reflected on the ripple effects of Tyler's choices. His crimes hadn't just hurt me, they had devastated everyone who had trusted him to be responsible and honest. His daughter might have to leave college. His ex-wife would have to scramble to cover expenses she thought were secure. His coworkers would have to manage without him during their busiest season. The scope of the betrayal was staggering, and I found myself wondering how long Tyler had been living this double life. When had the nephew who used to help me plant my garden become someone who could steal from trust funds and lie to banks? When had family obligation been replaced by predatory calculation? Around 5 o'clock, Rebecca Chen called with an update on the legal proceedings. "Tyler's been arraigned and charged with multiple felonies," she reported. "The prosecutor is taking this seriously because of the elder abuse component and the amount of money involved. Bail has been set at $50,000. Will he be able to pay it? Unlikely. His bank accounts are frozen and he'd need to come up with $5,000 in cash for a bail bondsman. Given his financial situation, he'll probably remain in custody until trial. So Tyler would spend Christmas in jail after all." I tried to feel some sympathy for him, but mostly I felt relief that he couldn't continue causing damage while free on bail. "What about the house?" I asked. "That's more complicated. Technically, Tyler still owns 60% of it, but his ownership is now entangled with criminal proceedings. The court has appointed a receiver to manage his assets during the trial. You're protected from eviction, and you're entitled to stay as long as the legal process continues." How long might that be? 6 months to a year, possibly longer if Tyler decides to fight the charges. "But Lily, there's something else you should know. The prosecutor wants to interview you as a witness. Your cooperation will be crucial for securing a conviction." The prospect of testifying against Tyler should have felt more momentous than it did. Instead, it felt like completing a task I had already begun when I photographed those documents in his filing cabinet. I had chosen accountability over family loyalty the moment I walked into that police station. Everything else was just following through. That evening, I cooked myself a simple dinner and ate it at the kitchen table with a cloth napkin and the good china. Not because I was celebrating, but because I could. Because no one was going to tell me that my food was too heavy or my dishes were outdated or my presence was inconvenient. As I washed the dishes, I thought about Christmas, now just 2 days away. For months, I had been dreading the holiday, knowing I would be either exiled to make room for Samantha's family or forced to endure their gathering as an unwelcome observer. Now I faced the prospect of spending Christmas alone, but the solitude felt like a gift rather than a punishment. The doorbell rang around 8 o'clock. Through the peephole, I could see a woman about my age, holding a covered dish and looking uncertain. I opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson from 3 houses down, someone I had spoken with occasionally while taking walks around the neighborhood. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, "but I heard there was some kind of police activity here today, and I wanted to make sure you were all right." I invited her in and made tea while she explained that the entire neighborhood had seen the police cars and Tyler being led away in handcuffs. Word had spread quickly that I was Tyler's aunt, and several neighbors had been debating whether to check on me. "We didn't know if you were in some kind of danger," Mrs. Patterson said, "or if you had somewhere to go for the holidays." Her kindness caught me off guard. For months I had felt invisible and unwanted, like someone whose presence was barely tolerated. The idea that neighbors I barely knew had been concerned about my welfare was overwhelming. "Thank you," I managed. "I'm fine. Tyler was arrested for financial crimes, but I was never in any physical danger." Mrs. Patterson nodded, and then hesitated. "This might be presumptuous, but my daughter and her family always join us for Christmas dinner. Would you like to come? We'd love to have you." I stared at this woman who was offering genuine hospitality to someone she barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. The contrast with my own family's treatment was so stark it almost made me laugh. "That's very kind," I said, "but I think I'm looking forward to a quiet Christmas at home." "Of course. But if you change your mind, or if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." After she left, I sat in the living room and looked around at the space that was mine again, at least temporarily. Tomorrow, I would start the process of rebuilding my life, finding a permanent place to live, working with lawyers to recover my stolen inheritance, testifying in criminal proceedings that would likely send my nephew to prison. But tonight, I was simply a woman in her own space, safe and dignified and free from the people who had tried to erase her existence. It wasn't the Christmas I had planned, but it was exactly the Christmas I deserved. Christmas Eve arrived with an unexpected gift. A phone call from Detective Morrison that would make the holiday more satisfying than I could have imagined. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying a note of professional satisfaction. "I wanted to update you on your nephew's situation. He's decided to waive his right to a bail hearing." I was sitting in the kitchen with my morning coffee, watching snow begin to dust the windowsill. What does that mean exactly? It means he's staying in jail until his trial. His public defender advised him that even if he could somehow come up with bail money, the conditions would be so restrictive he'd essentially be under house arrest anyway. No access to computers, no ability to conduct financial transactions, no contact with potential witnesses, including you. I set down my coffee cup with a small smile. So Tyler will be spending Christmas in the county jail. Christmas, New Year's, and likely several months beyond that. The prosecutor is pushing for a fast trial date because of the strength of the evidence. But even the fastest track puts us at late February or March. After Detective Morrison hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen and let the irony wash over me. 3 weeks ago, Tyler and Samantha had been planning to exile me to a basement or a motel so they could have their perfect Christmas celebration. Now Tyler was spending the holiday in a 6x8 cell, and Samantha was dealing with the fallout of dating a felon. The justice felt cleaner than revenge, more satisfying than anger. It was simply the natural consequence of choices Tyler had made, dominoes falling in the order he had arranged them. Around noon, my phone rang with a call that surprised me. It was Samantha. "Lily," she said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I needed to ask you something." "What is it, Samantha?" "The police came to my apartment yesterday. They had more questions about Tyler's finances, about whether I knew anything about his debts or the trust money. She paused. They also asked about the way we treated you. I waited for her to continue. I keep thinking about that dinner the other night, when you mentioned the lawyer and the trust fund. You knew exactly what was going to happen, didn't you? I knew Tyler was in serious legal trouble, yes. But you didn't warn him. You didn't try to help him figure out a way to fix it before the police got involved. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was genuinely puzzled, as if she couldn't understand how someone could watch a family member head toward disaster without trying to intervene. Samantha, I said carefully. Tyler had been stealing from me for 3 years. He was planning to complete a fraudulent loan that would have cost me 40% of my brother's house. He allowed you to pack my belongings and exile me to the garage so he could hide his crimes from your family. Why would I help him avoid the consequences of those choices? Because he's your nephew. Because family is supposed to protect each other. I almost laughed. Family is supposed to protect each other. Tyler forgot that when he decided to steal my inheritance. I was just returning the favor. There was a long silence. When Samantha spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. I lost my job yesterday. My real estate license is under review because of my association with Tyler's case. My family thinks I'm either an idiot or an accomplice. I have to move out of my apartment because I can't make rent without Tyler's help. Her voice broke. My entire life is falling apart because I fell in love with the wrong person. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Samantha, I spent 3 weeks sleeping on a couch in what was supposed to be my temporary home, while you planned to throw me out on the street for Christmas. You treated me like an inconvenience and spoke about me as if I weren't human. I'm sorry your life is difficult now, but you made choices too. I didn't know about the money, she said desperately. I swear I didn't know he was stealing from you, but you did know he was lying to me about Christmas plans. You did know he was trying to force me out of my home. You participated in making my life miserable even if you didn't know the full extent of Tyler's crimes. She was crying openly now. I thought you would understand. I thought maybe we could help each other through this. Samantha, the time for us to help each other was when you first started dating Tyler. If you had treated me with basic human decency, if you had seen me as a person rather than an obstacle, we might have been allies. Instead, you chose to see me as someone whose feelings didn't matter. After she hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap and reflected on the conversation. Part of me did feel sympathy for Samantha. She was young, and she was paying a steep price for trusting the wrong person. But sympathy didn't erase the weeks of casual cruelty, the dismissive laughter, the effortless way she had moved my belongings as if I were already gone. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. The snow was falling steadily now, creating the kind of winter wonderland that Christmas movies are made of. Houses glowed with warm light, and I could see families moving around inside, preparing for their holiday celebrations. Mrs. Patterson was outside putting up a new wreath when she spotted me. "Lily, how are you holding up?" "I'm doing well, thank you. The house feels peaceful now." She glanced toward Tyler's driveway, which was conspicuously empty. "I have to ask, is it true that your nephew was arrested for stealing from you?" Word had clearly spread through the neighborhood gossip network. I nodded. "Among other things, yes." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "I can't imagine how that must feel. Your own family betraying your trust like that." "It feels like justice," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. "It feels like someone finally held him accountable for his choices." That evening, I cooked myself a small Christmas Eve dinner. Nothing elaborate, just roast chicken with vegetables and a slice of store-bought pie. I set the table with candles and my brother's good china, the dishes Tyler had been planning to use as collateral for his fraudulent loan. As I ate, I thought about Christmas Eve's past. For most of my adult life, the holiday had been about other people. Cooking for my husband's family, hosting my brother and his son, managing the logistics of gift exchanges and complicated schedules. Even last year, when I was still living independently, I had spent Christmas Eve preparing for a gathering at my neighbor's house, bringing side dishes and helping with preparations. This was the first Christmas Eve I could remember that was entirely mine. No one to cook for except myself, no one to please or accommodate or work around. Just me, a quiet house, and the satisfaction of knowing that the people who had tried to erase me were facing the consequences of their choices. After dinner, I called Jennifer to check on how she was handling the financial crisis Tyler's arrest had created. She was managing, she told me, but her daughter would have to take out additional student loans for the spring semester. Tyler's employer had fired him immediately upon learning of the charges, so even if he made bail, there would be no income to resume support payments. "I should have seen the signs," Jennifer said. "He's been erratic with money since our divorce, but I thought it was just the stress of starting over. I never imagined he was stealing from his own family." Jennifer, Tyler became very good at hiding his problems. Even I didn't realize the extent of it until a few days ago. "How are you doing, Lily? Really?" It was the first time in months that someone had asked that question and waited for a real answer. "I'm angry," I said honestly, "but I'm also relieved. For weeks I felt like I was losing my mind, being treated like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Now I understand that the problem was never me. What will you do when the legal stuff is resolved?" "I don't know yet. Find my own place, I suppose. Start over at 68. I paused. "It's not ideal, but it's better than being dependent on people who see me as a burden." After we hung up, I sat in the living room with the Christmas tree lights glowing softly in the corner. Tyler and Samantha had bought that tree, chosen those decorations, arranged them to create their perfect holiday aesthetic, but they were in my space now, part of my quiet Christmas, transformed from symbols of my exclusion into reminders of my victory. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see two figures on the porch holding what looked like a large casserole dish. I opened the door to find Mrs. Patterson and her adult daughter, both bundled against the cold. "We brought you Christmas Eve dinner," the daughter said with a smile. "Mom told me you were spending the holiday alone, and we thought you might enjoy some company." They stayed for 2 hours, sharing stories and laughter around my kitchen table. Mrs. Patterson's daughter was a nurse who had seen her share of family financial abuse cases, and she listened to my story with professional understanding and personal outrage. "You did exactly the right thing," she assured me. "People like your nephew count on their victims being too polite or too ashamed to fight back. You probably saved other people from being hurt by stopping him when you did." When they left, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine human connection without strings attached. These women barely knew me, but they had seen someone spending Christmas alone and decided to share their warmth simply because it was kind. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about Tyler spending his first night in jail, probably lying on a thin mattress and wondering how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. I thought about Samantha, alone in her apartment, facing the reality that her relationship had been built on lies and stolen money. And I thought about myself, sleeping in my own bed in a house where I was safe and respected, where no one would wake up tomorrow and tell me I was in the way. It was turning out to be the best Christmas I had had in years. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with sunlight streaming through my bedroom window like a promise of better things ahead. I woke naturally, without an alarm, in my own bed for the first time in weeks. The silence in the house wasn't the oppressive quiet of being unwelcome. It was the peaceful stillness of finally being home. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the snow sparkle in the morning light. Somewhere across town, Tyler was waking up in a jail cell, probably wondering how his elaborate scheme to hide his crimes had backfired so spectacularly. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who had tried to make me homeless for Christmas was now the one without a home to return to. My phone buzzed with a text message from Rebecca Chen. "Merry Christmas, Lily. Enjoy your peaceful morning. You earned it." She was right. I had earned this peace, this dignity, this moment of sitting in my own space, without fear of being told I was in the way. It had cost me a relationship with my nephew, but that relationship had already been destroyed by his choices. I had simply refused to pretend otherwise. Around 10 o'clock, Detective Morrison called with what she described as a quote, Christmas gift of information. Tyler's cellmate apparently had quite a conversation with him last night, she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. Seems Tyler was feeling chatty about his situation, and his new roommate happened to be wearing a wire as part of his own plea deal. I nearly choked on my coffee. Tyler confessed to someone wearing a wire? Not exactly confessed, but he made some very interesting statements about his financial strategies and his plans for dealing with what he called the old lady problem. The recording won't be admissible in court, but it gives us a clear picture of his mindset and might help us understand the full scope of his fraudulent activities. Tyler's arrogance had apparently survived even his arrest. Even in jail, he was still trying to manipulate the situation, still convinced he was the smartest person in the room. It was fitting that his own ego would provide additional evidence against him. "There's more," Detective Morrison continued. "The fraud investigation has expanded. We've discovered that Tyler used similar tactics with at least 2 other elderly relatives over the past 5 years. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there from their accounts when he had access to help with their banking. We think your case might be part of a larger pattern." The news hit me like a physical blow. Tyler hadn't just betrayed me. He had made a career out of exploiting elderly family members who trusted him. My situation wasn't a desperate response to financial crisis. It was a calculated business model. "Who else?" I asked quietly. "His great-aunt on his mother's side, and a family friend who had named him as executor of her estate. Both women are deceased now, so they can't testify, but the financial records tell a clear story." I thought about those women, probably grateful for Tyler's attention, probably never suspecting that his helpfulness came with a price. How many other elderly people had he charmed and stolen from? How many had died, never knowing they had been robbed by someone they trusted? After the call ended, I sat in the kitchen and let the full weight of Tyler's betrayal settle over me. This wasn't about gambling debts or financial desperation. This was about a man who had systematically exploited the vulnerability of aging relatives for years, perfecting his techniques with each victim. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the scope of his crimes, I felt something approaching pride. I had been the one who fought back. I had been the one who documented the evidence and demanded accountability. I had stopped Tyler's pattern of abuse, probably preventing future victims from suffering the same betrayal. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Patterson holding a plate of Christmas cookies and looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope I'm not bothering you," she said, "but I wanted to apologize for yesterday." "Apologize for what?" "For assuming you were alone by circumstance rather than by choice. My daughter pointed out that I might have been presumptuous, treating you like someone who needed rescuing, rather than someone who was perfectly capable of enjoying her own company." I smiled and invited her in for coffee. "Mrs. Patterson, your kindness yesterday was exactly what I needed. But you're right. I am alone by choice today, and it feels wonderful." We sat at the kitchen table, sharing cookies and talking about everything except Tyler and the dramatic events of the past few days. Mrs. Patterson told me about her grandchildren, her volunteer work at the local library, her plans for traveling once her husband retired. I found myself talking about my own interests, books I wanted to read, places I hoped to visit, projects I wanted to pursue once my housing situation was settled. It was the first conversation I'd had in months where I felt like a complete person rather than someone's burden or problem to be solved. "Lily," Mrs. Patterson said as she was leaving, "I hope you'll consider staying in the neighborhood when all this legal business is resolved. You're exactly the kind of neighbor we need more of." That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since moving in with Tyler. I made plans for my future that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. I called a real estate agent, not Samantha, obviously, and made an appointment to look at condominiums and small houses in the area. With the inheritance money that would eventually be restored to me, plus the proceeds from my share of Tyler's house when it was eventually sold, I would have enough for a modest down payment on my own place. I researched volunteer opportunities at the local hospital, thinking about how my bookkeeping skills might be useful for nonprofit organizations. I looked into community college classes for seniors, considering subjects I had always been curious about but never had time to explore. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on what I wanted rather than what other people needed from me. That evening, Jennifer called to wish me Merry Christmas and share some unexpected news. "Tyler's lawyer contacted me today," she said. "He wants to make a plea deal. Part of the agreement would involve him signing over his full ownership of the house to you as partial restitution for the money he stole." I was stunned. The entire house? Apparently his debts are so extensive that he's going to lose it anyway. His lawyer thinks offering it to you voluntarily might convince the judge to give him a lighter sentence. The house, Tyler's house, which contained so many painful memories of the past few months, but which was also substantial property in a good neighborhood. Property that could give me real financial security for the rest of my life. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, I think you should take it. Tyler destroyed a lot of lives with his choices. If he's finally ready to make amends, you shouldn't feel guilty about accepting them." After we hung up, I walked through the house with new eyes. This place where I had felt unwelcome and erased could become truly mine. I could renovate it to suit my preferences, create a home that reflected my personality rather than accommodating someone else's vision. But more importantly, I could use it as a foundation for building the kind of life I wanted, one where I was the primary character in my own story rather than a supporting player in someone else's drama. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few days. A week ago, I had been sleeping on a couch, treated like an unwanted guest in my own temporary home, facing the prospect of being thrown out on the street for Christmas. Tonight, I was sleeping in my own bed, in a house that might soon be legally mine, surrounded by neighbors who had shown me genuine kindness, with a future that was entirely my own to shape. Tyler had tried to steal my inheritance, my home, and my dignity. Instead, his crimes had given me something far more valuable: the knowledge that I was strong enough to fight for myself, smart enough to outmaneuver people who underestimated me, and worthy of respect regardless of my age or circumstances. He had planned to make me homeless for Christmas. Instead, he had made me truly free. Sometimes, the best revenge really is living well. And sometimes, justice arrives wrapped in a bow, delivered exactly when you need it most. As I drifted off to sleep in my own bed, in my own space, I smiled, thinking about Tyler's Christmas morning in jail. He had gotten exactly what he deserved, and I had gotten something even better: a second chance to build the life I actually wanted. It was, without question, the best Christmas gift I had ever received. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.